Mindshare is, if you're not familiar with the term, it broadly refers to the idea that a very specific notion would occupy a certain proportion of what people think about in some way. I'm not using it qualitatively. So when I refer to the mindshare of PDF, I don't mean that people are actually thinking about PDF technology. They're thinking about something that PDF represents to them and serves, therefore, as a proxy for some real thing in the world that matters in some way. Otherwise, in principle, they wouldn't mention it, right? So this is an attempt to contextualize awareness of PDF, done by an amateur. Let me say, I'm not an academic at this. I'm not going to try and tell you that, for example, Google Trends, which is data that I draw from in this, means something specific. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so let's start with the facts, with recognizing a couple of key facts. PDF is clearly recognized worldwide, broadly adopted. Everybody accepts it. It's just PDF, right? And there's a rich ecosystem of developers supporting it. Many of them are here in this room, in this place at this time. But what about PDF adoption and utilization? So I'm going to offer you some thoughts about shall we say, some ideas about context, some mind share, and then some actual hard data, which is a little different than the stuff you can get, for example, from Google, but nonetheless hard data that offers a type of representation of PDF. And I'm going to try and draw a couple lessons from that, such as I can. So platforms are essentially unchanged. Let me say one thing before I get to that. In 2018, I offered a presentation called PDF Statistics. It didn't include a lot of hard statistics in it. It included some that are very similar to statistics that I'm going to show here now. And I'm going to provide some comparison between 2018 and 2022. But in the main, this is, there's a bunch of other ideas and conclusions in here. But just wanted to point out that over time I'm going to be able to paint a picture, I hope. Okay, so the platforms, broadly speaking, are essentially unchanged. Maybe some new entrants or some other changes in the world of online storage, but broadly speaking, desktops, browsers, and mobile platforms are similar. Mobile devices, however, have clearly increased in traffic share over time. So now mobile devices are actually really genuinely taking more than half of the internet traffic. It's a key development. All of this basically brand new since about 2008, right? Since roughly speaking the introduction of the iPhone. So let's turn it back to PDF for a moment. What would it take to compete with PDF, right? So if we talk of Mindshare, then and we're specifically talking about PDF, then there's some reasonable question which is to be asked: what would it take for a different technology to become known, or to be, even if people still called it PDF, what would it take for that thing to be known as PDF, even if it wasn't? Value proposition now is more or less the same as it was before, right? It's self-contained, it's portable, it's fixed, created from pretty much anything, anytime. It's easy to make it, published specification. These are the sort of critical ingredients. They're the original key formula for PDF since 1993, broadly speaking. And they've remained true to this date, in fact, except that they become truer over time. Specifications better, and more people have implemented it. Support is broader. There is an ecosystem. Originally, it was a single vendor who invented it. So these things have all contributed towards the development of PDF. And in fact, the need to compete with PDF involves, today you would say, well, there's some sort of idea of there's cloud-based things and applicationware that does the job. But broadly speaking, PDF does a specific thing, and there's nothing else that really does this specific thing, right? Potentially competitive technologies this day, we sort of talk about web-based things. Web-based things have their value. They're really good. They're really amazing, actually, at what they do. I use them all the time. So do you. Applications, you use those things too. You use them less than you used to, but you definitely use them. But they've got their issues, and the portability thing is definitely an issue. Not just between users, of course, but over time. It's fundamental to that problem. Images, paper, and fiche are definitely classes of competitive technologies, right? But they have probably had their day in terms of being the kind of information that is something that's going to carry us forward in the new world. Okay, so let's have a quick look at, let's take a SWOT and a pestle analysis view of PDF for a moment. PDF clearly has strong strengths and weaknesses, to it, and I'm not going to iterate through all these and put them on the screen here for you. These are just my ideas. Everybody else has their own. There are other ideas probably more valid than this. These are just some that occur to me. Clearly, reliability and ubiquity, those are fundamentals, right? PDF, wow, it's just everywhere. As I've been saying, not much in the way of competition, from the strictly speaking, in terms of what it delivers. But of course, key weaknesses involve variations in support, the fact that the web, although it clearly uses PDF, links to PDF all the time, it kind of references it and otherwise treats it as sort of a black box, right? So PDF is very complex, and the fact that that specification today is paywalled, that's of no help. So there are opportunities clearly for PDF. Kenny was outlining some of these in his keynote earlier today, digital transformation. But the semantic structure opportunities in PDF, which of course weren't there at the beginning, were added starting in PDF 1.3 and 1.4, and becoming, are still frankly evolving. PDF 2.0 is not the last word in that technology in PDF. Workflow integration and packaging seem to be interesting new opportunities for PDF. And we're seeing that within the PDF Association with a notable amount of interest in, for example, EA PDF, the idea of archiving email data as PDF files. So clearly there are threats to this PDF ecosystem. They have a common thread, which is a technical debt burden that comes from the natural process of developing over many years, but has led to a situation where there's an awful lot of time spent on fixing up odd PDF files. And I'll just leave it at that, because I'm not the one to really talk about that. I'm not the one that has to do it. So let's have a look at a notional pestle analysis. Okay, PDF is used by government all over the place for critical records. Therefore, government operations are increasingly regulated. So that means PDF is relevant to government, and you'll find, and indeed it's the case, that government kind of identifies PDF and says and assumes increasingly that you're going to be doing something. If you're going to be doing something digital, moving something around, you're going to use a PDF. Why does government do this? Well, PDF is clearly the only viable lowest common denominator for a document object that you can pass from one person to another, right? So economic, PDF's ubiquitous throughout the economy. It's everywhere, doing its digital paper job. At the very least, it's doing the digital paper job. In many places, it's doing a lot more. It's carrying some other payload of interesting information. So in social and technical terms, PDF documents have gone a tremendous degree of the distance towards replacing paper. Most of us don't own as much paper as we used to, because we're perfectly comfortable with the fact that we have PDF files sitting on a hard drive of a laptop somewhere. That's a remarkable change, probably of the last 15 years or so in the case of most people. But we're seeing, but this is increasingly a phenomenon where people have over 30 years have come to believe that PDF is in fact the genuine replacement for paper. That's not to say that there are not substantial challenges, and one of the continuing places of irritation, there's no question about it, is the relative inaccessibility, certainly perceived, of the PDF format, and that's a major area of challenge. So the technical, of course, issues with PDF is that, as I've been saying, it's not necessary. It's a wonderful format in itself, but it's also a difficult format for others to get into, and so we'll come back to that. So in legal and environmental terms, PDF is increasingly required in legislation, as indicated earlier, pertaining to the political part of the analysis. In environmental terms, it's a mixed bag, frankly, because it's on the one hand, PDF is clearly green at some level. You're not printing something if you can use a PDF. On the other hand, because it's a PDF, for some people, that means it's a good thing to print. Okay, so a de facto standard PDF. It's like some other of these standards that people think of, HTML and doc and MP3. So PDF is just another one of those, right? That's all. But it's huge. But it's a lot to say. because it means that forever and ever, it's really, it seems likely that at some point you're going to have to be dealing with this. And that implies that it's worth care and attention to how we go about that. Because PDF is like electricity. Nobody actually cares, okay? Or let me put it differently. All the people who care, most of them are here. Let's hope we all are safe, because there's a lot of PDF brain power in these 3 rooms. And there's, it's not, at the moment, this moment in time, it's not particularly well distributed. You never want to think about how PDF actually operates. You don't want to live without it, and that's pretty fundamental. There may be, as I've said, there may be some way out of PDF, but it would have to go through PDF to get there. So one way to recognize a de facto standard is to see what it looks like in Google Trends. So here I'm going to go ahead and assert that you can measure in some fashion Mindshare through Google Trends. If you're not familiar with Google Trends, it does the job in the following way. You tell it a search term, and it says, okay, well, a certain number of people found that, looked for that search term over whatever time period you're asking for. And then a certain number of people searched the whole web for whatever, anything. So let's compare those numbers and then see what the trend is. And that tells you that if the number of people looking for PDF relative to all searches changes, goes up, then PDF Mindshare is increasing. That's the claim. That's the working claim, okay, for this portion of the presentation. So PDF keeps going up. In 2022, or excuse me, in 2018, when I last presented this particular image, PDF was at the point that you see marked on the slide. And you can see several interesting things here. Number one, it's bouncy. It's bouncy because seasonally, PDF, it's a seasonal thing. People in the summer, they don't look at PDF so much, okay? Go figure. But it does keep going up. That's true of very, very few technologies in the world. You'll be hard-pressed to go find other technologies that have the same overall trend since 2004. And you notice that it went through a dip after it started off and after it started being measured. And then it came back up, right? It came back up as as everything went mobile. It kept going up. PDF kept going up. And it went up that you can see that little bump there at the end. That's actually, there's a vertical line there, and Google changed their measuring system, which they improved it. They improved their data collection or whatever, right? They don't get into specifics. Either way, the delta was up, not down, right? So PDF also compares to other popular subjects with people have searched for many times. Right, but it didn't, of course, it was not competitive at the end of the day at 2 different recent occasions, 2 elections. But PDF, but Biden never beat PDF. Okay, so PDF, this is giving you a real idea of scale, is that you imagine a lot of people search for information about iPhones, right? So iPhone this and iPhone that. I want an iPhone, or how do I get a free iPhone, or fix my iPhone, or a lot of interest in iPhones, but it's comparable in volume. And you can see those spikes. If you check, they line up, of course, with new iterations of the iPhone being released each year. Of course, it's when interest spikes in the iPhone, right? And you can see that it's very much more popular than PDF, in that cycle that it has, and that's fine. But they're about more or less parity at this point. Interest in editing PDF, you can also do a phrase search in Google Trends. And interest in editing PDF is also slowly ticked up and then gets a boost at a certain point. What is that point? It's COVID. You've seen some of this, I think LOD at her earlier presentation is offering some of this information as well. So interest in tweaking a PDF file changed when everybody started working from home, all of a sudden when a certain nasty event overcame us in the last couple of years. What about converting to PDF, converting from PDF, doing other kind of workflow-like things with PDF? Well, it's notable here. These are of course, because they're phrase searches, they have to line up exactly with what people search for. So this is, of course, extremely English language biased, just to begin with, right? It goes without saying it, but I'm saying it anyway because I just want to be clear about that. This is obviously, therefore, heavily North America-centric, or English-speaking world-centric, and so on. Nonetheless, it is some sort of picture, and it's my own resources to do this amounts to performing these searches and thinking about them, right? So I can't do all the searches. But you can see that there are there's an indication here that converting PDF to Word it's responsive, it seems, to events. PDF and print. People weren't printing a lot more or thinking about printing a lot more during COVID, but it seems that they did fine thinking about PDF. So accessible PDF, another interesting subject to many. It's not necessarily notably COVID responsive, right? But it definitely continues to show an upward trend. Still growing relative to other searches. I had to include this one because I've been asked several times about the converting to the comparison with EPUB that I did do in 2018. And this one's notable because convert to EPUB is, of course, much more general to convert EPUB to PDF. I'll allow you to draw your own conclusions. So in 2018, we checked in on conversion objectives for PDF. When people go ahead and search, how do I convert to Google? It's not me, it's Google. Back then, it was it had made its still right up there. Still right up there. Okay. So searches for conversion in general, just in general, that people enter into Google tend to be about PDF. I just search for convert and it comes up, converting or how to convert. And PDF just seems somehow pretty central in what people think about when they're just sort of doing stuff on a computer, or at least thinking about converting it. So let's ask about what's out there for. I need a time check. How much time do I have left?
10 minutes to go.
Okay, great. Thank you.
50.
Okay, great. No, I don't want to leave some time for questions. Okay, so we did had some data that I presented in 2018. I presented Dual Labs data. Thank you, Boris, if he's in here. I can't actually see because of the light. Based on Dual Labs' own crawl that they had performed. They had a methodology that captured files randomly from the web, 500,000 of them, and I have some of that data, and I have it again here. And Tim Allison, who is actually, I'd hoped to be able to say, now you should go see Tim Allison's presentation right after mine, but Tim is actually presenting at the same time next door, and he has a lot more of this information, a lot more technical. And he shared some of this analysis of his recent crawl from August 2021 of 8 million PDF files. And these are actually the 8 million files collected by Common Crawl in their August 2021 crawl. And so Common Crawl, I'm not the one to explain it to you, but it's a quality source of internet crawling, so I am reliably told. And Leonard of Adobe, sitting right here, has been kind enough to share a variety of data, both from Adobe's own deep reservoir of PDF files, an extremely large collection, as you see, but also from what their own implementation has seen. So just to introduce the PDF Observatory data from Tim Allison, I'm deeply appreciative to Tim. He's one of the contractors on DARPA's SafeDocs program, and Peter and I are both very familiar with Tim and have worked extensively with him, Peter, less so than myself, more so than myself, on supporting his development of this technology. And so we have very much Tim to thank for much of this information. So the cumulative percentage of PDF files by age. So in this here we compare the data from 2018 with data from 2021. Of course, these crawls are different. There are many things in the way in which we cannot compare this information, but the volumes are such that perhaps we can establish one interesting point, which is that the files are clearly younger, right? So this shows that in 2018, only 7.2% of files were less than a year old, whereas 45% of files were less than a year old in the latter crawl. And this is the common crawl was an internet representative crawl. And the common crawl found that over half of PDF files were less than 2 years old, whereas 4 years ago, only 12.8% were less than 2 years old. The implication, if you believe the comparison between these data, this is just, I present the data, and my interpretation, and you obviously can make your own. But the implication is that there's a lot of refreshing going on. Newer PDF files have accelerated. So proportion of ISO subsets and tag PDF. Now, this is an analysis that brings together the three evaluations of demographics that we had previously seen. The data from Dual Lab from 2018, from the Common Crawl, and then, of course, from Adobe's Deep Reservoir. And you can see here that PDFA has notably improved in terms of the proportion of files found on the web that are not only PDF files, but are claiming to be PDFA files. Right? Substantial improvement there, 0.6 to 0.19. And this is 0.19 from the Deep Reservoir, and I'm going to talk about why there may be some interesting, in the next slide, I'll talk about why there might be some interesting differences between what Deep Reservoir sees and the Common Crawl sees. And PDFX, you see there, it's also a higher proportion, but you might not even expect necessarily to find a lot of PDFX files on the internet anyway, and not necessarily know whether or not that's whether that's particularly significant of some interesting development in PDF. For myself, and I will admit to being biased about this, but I find the PDF UA number interesting only if because of the change from where it was to where it is as of August 2021 is such a notable change. And the scale of these crawls is such that there might be some value to the scale of that change. But again, that's just my suggestion. I'm not the data scientist to tell you the true significance of the change that's all happening underneath the percent. Tagged PDF, though, is curious in that in 2018, we saw a result of indicating 14% of the files that were reviewed were tagged PDF, and then both the Deep Reservoir and the recent Common Crawl agree that over a third of PDF files on the internet are now tagged PDF, which is really a pretty dramatic change over time. Or maybe it isn't, because when we consider that among the other changes that have occurred since 2018, various tools have started to turn on the creation of tagged PDF by default. So Microsoft Office files are characteristically just tagged PDF out of the box, and Apple's tool, in addition, their productivity suite automatically makes tagged PDF files without even asking whether you'd like them. So flavors of PDFA. This data comes from the Deep Reservoir. Again, thanks to Adobe for providing this. And there were 1.2, you'll remember from the last slide, 1.2% of files claimed PDFA conformance. What was the distribution by conformance level? As you could see, PDF, now this is where I want to get into one possible thing you have to consider about the Deep Reservoir. And I hope I hope I understand this correctly. But it's a collection that has occurred over time, and so it may include a large bias towards older files, right? So that may account for this distribution, but it is nonetheless we definitely see some uptake in PDF in ISO 32000 Part 1 base specification. So when we compare, though, the Common Crawl with Deep Reservoir in terms of the PDF files by file header version, we can see, where we can see what I believe is sort of, as it were, more evidence that the Deep Reservoir is operating in a historical vision, whereas the Common Crawl is more of an appropriate snapshot. All right. So you see in particular, for example, 1.7, there's a significant delta. It's, it would be reasonable to surmise perhaps that the deep reservoirs, if it's a crawl over time, it would have gathered, relatively speaking, more 1.3, 1.4 files than 1.7. Again, that's completely my speculation. I put the data on the screen. And if Leonard will hopefully be available to answer any questions about this data if you have them. He's right here after the presentation. So we also have to remember that, and when we consider what does this mean, right? Why does PDF 2.0 have such a relatively small proportion? Most PDF creation software does not necessarily need to add, does not need to add the PDF 2.0 flag unless there's a reason. Unless a feature was added, there was a PDF 2.0 feature, right? So if producer software isn't requesting this feature, there's really no reason to add that flag, or so may be the case. So let's look at some PDF demographics as seen by what we like to call the ISO table, a well-known implementation, and I can go ahead and tell you that it's actually Adobe in this case. Thanks again to Leonard for providing this information that allows me to provide this comparison to you of data over time for what their implementation has seen. And I think it's particularly interesting and it's significant that we look at this data and consider what it might mean, and that it is in a sense initially startling, but on consideration obvious, right? And I very much appreciate it being shared, because everybody normally likes to tell a story of pluses, but this is actually a story of an environmental change, right? So in this case, Reader had a certain level of usage, and Acrobat another, and files opened and so on in 2016, which is when Leonard first reported the 2016 data. In 2018, Leonard helped me write a presentation. He provided the following data. And at the time, I presented and I said, look, everybody's using this stuff much more. That's really cool, right? Because it means PDF is booming. And files opened were up, Acrobat and Reader, more stuff happening. So that's got to be good. Now, we have a situation where the data says that there's actually much less happening with Acrobat and Reader, right? And does that mean something's bad? Think about it. Look, think about the Google Trends data, right? That means that people are doing as much and more stuff with PDF than they ever did. It has to, because it's Google. It's what people search for. It's the way everybody learns to do everything. It includes YouTube data, right? Google knows about all that stuff. The YouTube videos are included in their search. What are the key dynamics since 2018 that might explain the fact that PDF use keeps going up, but usage of a leading desktop application for PDF is not keeping up with the increased usage, and in fact has lost, right, in some important sense. Browsers have developed capable PDF viewers. Users have increasingly started to adopt cloud-based means of working with their content. So don't even think about it. They might even use, they use PDF all the time. Somebody made one, they parked it on the cloud, just like a Word file, just like a GDoc, whatever, right? But they didn't use Acrobat to interact with it. They didn't need to, right? So there's a broad trend towards mobile devices. Well, for the most part, most users are just using whatever the browser serves them. The browser can go ahead, as the browser on your mobile device also uses a native PDF viewer. It's not necessarily Adobe, right? So that's another. If think about the stat I showed earlier, which is all that trend leading towards use on mobile devices. If that's where the traffic is, then these desktop data are going to show a decline. So there are all kinds of reasons why this information is actually doesn't speak to PDF's success in the slightest, right? That's why the Google Trends data is actually so important. It's because by measuring the Mindshare, you can free yourself from the need to start counting seats that you might imagine like are out there remaining to be sold of something. All right, if you're really looking at the broader marketplace, understanding the appeal of the technology might involve understanding how the trends appear over time. So just to follow up on, because Leonard was kind enough to share this data as well, we have, as it were, three historical points of data on the types of content that these desktop applications were seeing. Okay, images sort of hanging in there at about the same percentage, right? Image-only files, that is to say, they came from a scanner, they came from a camera or whatever. Increasing volume of files are bookmarked, like see that, makes them easier to navigate. More files slowly secured over time. Again, these are big numbers that get processed here. So a change of 1% probably does mean a change of something like 20, 30% of improvement going from 3 to 4% might actually mean quite a lot more usage. Acroforms, likewise, right? And now the tag PDF number is interesting, right? Why did it go from 35 and 37 to 22? Well, particularly interesting when you consider the other data that says that tag PDF is actually increased substantially in terms of the files seen online. Well, over on the other slide, we notice that it's entirely possible that the change in what Acrobat views here has to do with what's actually happening only on a desktop. But perhaps most of the files that people are viewing in browsers, right? And if a lot of people if tagged PDF files are on the web more than necessarily on people's desktops, which I can tell you is the case on my desktop, right? I squirt out PDF files for my own use, and I don't notice whether the application tagged them or not. I'll admit it, right? Because it's only me doing it for some reason. So that could explain it. And the other possibility is that it could explain it is the analytics. Obviously the applications have to sort of tell Adobe, characterize these the characters of the files that they saw. Many organizations block these sort of analytics from phoning this data home, right? So there are lots of possible explanations for this, but it's notable. So I'll close with a slide that I get constant requests for this data, and I'm not sure how much I learned from it per se, but updating the slide from 2028, and this is simply, and again, biased by virtue of the fact that large organizations block analytics, and they do so much more in 2022 than they did in 2018. Having said that large organizations block analytics a lot more, this is what, here's the data regarding files opened by Adobe in 2020, in 1 month of 2022. And I will not offer any characterization of it at all, because I just don't know what it means, to tell you the honest truth. But I know that it's very interesting to a lot of people. It certainly tells you something. Shows you that RICO is amazingly making a tremendous amount of files.
So is unknown.
So is unknown. Unknown is a vast number of.
Anything that was derived from HTML, like using Chromium, would ultimately be unknown.
Well, no,
Yeah.
unknown is literally blank, blank. There is nothing in the creator and producer field.
Right.
What unknown means in this case.
Yeah.
Which is really bad.
Yeah. So I thank you for your time in listening to my presentation, and I hope you got something out of it, and at least some inspiration to go check Google Trends every so often, because I think in the world of giant numbers and of a technology as diffuse in its usage and as with a kind of consumer awareness of PDF, you can learn a lot from Google Trends, and it's certainly a resource worth following.